on plants and people growing profits in production. So this is a really interesting one because we have a lot of people from the production side of the cannabis industry on this panel right now. So I'm going to have everyone introduce themselves, talk about their company, and then also say like where in the supply chain you are just for the audience. And I'll start with Matt.
I'm Matt Mayberry. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Trym, and we build software for cannabis cultivators. We help growers with improving their yields, improving their operational efficiency, and also simplifying compliance.
Yeah.
Right.
My name is Seiferling. I'm CEO and co-founder of Adaviv. Like Matt, we work in cultivation and we work broadly in ag tech, agriculture technology. Similarly also to Trym, ultimately we're both trying to help improve yields and processes and ultimately, how much it costs to grow a plant. The way we do it, and we work synergistically with Trym, is to generate what we call plant level data, plant intelligence, to help improve crop health and also to help improve some of the labor and the crop steering going on by leveraging that plant level data. And we collect that plant level data with machine vision.
Well, hey, everybody, for people that were in here panel before, I'm back. I'm Karson, the founder of Vangst. We are the industry's hiring platform. So we help companies find talent and we help talent find jobs. I don't want people to think I'm like shaking because I'm nervous. I'm just a little bit cold in this seat. So if people are looking at me like, why is she so nervous shaking? I'm warmed up from the last panel, so I'm not nervous. Yeah, just something. So anyway, very happy to be here. I think it's going to be a great conversation.
Awesome. Very cool. So just to set the stage here, cannabis is very different growing it from traditional agriculture because it grew out of an illegal industry and then it became legal. So with that transition, like there are a lot of opportunities with tech to advance that, but there's also some catching up to do. So why I'm really excited for this panel today is because I think there's a lot of new tech out there that can really elevate the cultivation side of the industry, especially. And I think we just don't know about it yet, or we don't really know how to harness that power. So I just want to start off, and I'm going to direct this first question to Karson. Give us just what is the state of the industry right now in terms of maybe your average cultivator or someone on the production side, what are you seeing trend wise just in today's day and age?
Right. I think that most of us here, right, when we open up our LinkedIns, we see a sea of I was part of the mass layoff at X company. It's not just in cannabis, right? It's in large tech. I was part of the 10,000 people that were just laid off at Google or what insert company. So it seems like that's also carrying over to cannabis and cannabis businesses. This year, industry funding was down 96% year over year in 2022. That's basically 100, right? And so their companies have to be more efficient and they therefore have to reduce the total, their total labor costs, which is, some people were saying, are you guys kind of competitors, I guess? And I was like, not so much because, we want our clients to be able to automate some of their processes so that then they can have the employees that they do have good, stable jobs, and these businesses can run profitable businesses. And a lot of businesses were very, very overstaffed, which is why we're seeing as many of the layoffs as we are, right? Businesses have to be profitable, have to run good, lean, efficient businesses. And we're seeing a lot of that play out right now. We're seeing a lot of layoffs across the entire space right now.
Absolutely. And for Matt and Ian, what are you seeing in terms of the technological sophistication of cultivators right now? Where are we at very generally with the average one that you talk to?
I'll start if that's okay. I think cannabis is really unique in many ways, but in cultivation, at the end of the day, it is an agricultural product, in my opinion. So I think I'll probably reference that quite a lot in this discussion. because I think there's a lot to learn about from the agricultural industry. But cannabis is unique, like it doesn't have that decades of R&D, right? It doesn't have lab science, it doesn't have big ag science doing decades of research, pumping millions of dollars into it. So by that very fact, there is a huge amount of variation in this kind of sophistication of where different operators and different growers are. I think where we're at is that there is a lot of knowledge out there. You know, I think people know how to grow this crop really well, but how you do it at scale is where the gap is. And agriculture is in this gap. Like it's really going from a subjective industry or process to something that's more data driven, more tech enabled. And so it's in a maturing phase by the very nature of where we're at. And I think what we've seen is, you know, smaller, you know, operators deal with things like we have all this knowledge, we know what we're doing, but how do we do it at scale? How do we create better SOPs? How do we communicate those to our team in the field? And the gaps are that, you know, there's gaps in that communication, those SOPs, that everything looks fine, but then all of a sudden we have a big pest outbreak and it's a disaster. Large MSOs, maybe they have more, you know, they have more people, they maybe have more R&D, they have agronomists on their team, but they don't have visibility. And so ironically, they have the same problems. They have a gap in scaling those SOPs and standardization, and they have chronic issues, you know, pests and disease, aphids, mites, pathogens. So I think, you know, what we're all here trying to do is help close those gaps.
So to leverage what Ian just said, we started Trym about 5 years ago, and when we first started, it was really heavy educational effort just to inform people what our software did and why, as a grower, you would want to use it. I've made plenty of jokes about deciding to sell software to farmers was a really hilarious decision, because most people became growers because they didn't want to be in front of a computer, and we're trying to show them how to leverage our service. That being said, over the last 5 years, we have seen the sophistication level of the industry grow a lot, and I think growers have started to see that they do have a lot of the problems that Ian just mentioned, and that the only way that they're going to be able to overcome those challenges is to get better about collecting data, and the way that they analyze that data and utilizing a software service is a good way to do that.
I totally agree. And I think it's interesting too, because I like what you said, Ian, because you're not saying that we came from a stone age where people were just growing plants and whatever they grew is good enough. People know how to grow it. I think we're kind of evolving into an age, especially today, where you have to maximize your yield. No answer for buts, you have to produce the most you possibly can. And it really matters how much you can. And I think data and technology is the only way to really maximize it. And also preventative measures. I know this panel is called growing profits in production, but it's also about cutting costs to a great degree for what Adaviv and Trym are doing as well. So you talk about it's really important to collect data. I'll ask you this first, Matt. Just what is the role of technology in collecting data? Why is that so important to try and both cut costs and grow profits?
Yeah, so I think, when we talk to growers about the cost of our service, as an example, they're like, well, we already have all of this data. And the one question I like to ask is, okay, well, where is it and how do you use it currently? And they're like, oh, well, it's all in these spreadsheets and in these notes. And, if we wanted to, we could analyze it. And I'm like, okay, so that's a data science problem. You know how much data scientists cost. This is, when you compare that to the cost of our service, it's actually a relatively efficient service. So what is the role of data and why would you do it? If you think about the scientific method, you need to have a hypothesis, and then you need to perform an experiment and measure the outcome, right? So theoretically, if you're trying to collect data in any business, whether it's cannabis production or producing widgets, you are likely collecting data because you want to improve something. And so the role that a pen and paper can have, or the role that a piece of software can have, is that it can be a tool to collect the inputs so that you can measure the outputs. Where software has an advantage over pen and paper is that those correlations can be made in an automated way. You don't have to pay somebody to do that work, and it can be available instantaneously. So I'd say that's where a software service like Trym comes in, is that you have your team in the field putting all the data in, and then on the other end, as soon as you finish a harvest, we give you a whole harvest report. We compare it to every other harvest you've ever done. It's got all of the info about cannabinoid profiles, it's got terpene profiles, it's got your potency, it's got your total yield, how many labor hours went into it. And like that assessment alone would take dozens of hours to do for any single harvest.
So what do you mean?
Yeah, I mean, I would just extend what Matt really put well. I mean, it's we've talked about it in all the talks, like how data drive efficiency improvements, and it's the same principles, right? Like you need KPIs to track progress, to continuously improve. To make a KPI, you need good data, and then you need good ways to communicate that data really simply to people and to growers across the organization. So I think it's, it comes down to traceability and operational health. And then it comes down to being able to predict and being able to repeat what you've done. Those two buckets, I think, and they're both driven by data. And I think, the blunt facts are that if operators don't adopt, some of these new automations, some new tech, lean, it's time is now. The blunt truth is that companies will go bankrupt if they're not optimizing their costs. And so that comes first, and comes second is how do you grow amazing weed, and you can do that well with data as well. And what we see when we work with growers often is that you pull up the rug a little bit and you see a ton of opportunity. Like guys are doing great jobs growing great weed, but you uncover and you look at like what are you spending on treatments to prevent pests and diseases? The variation is massive across the industry. There's no standard, and not everybody can have the winning recipe, right? Look at other egg products again. It's highly standardized. So, get to that point where you can understand like how much should I be spending on treatments to de-risk, pests and pathogens, so that I can focus on this cooler stuff like innovating and new genetics. So.
I think the lack of data is also seen labor planning as well. Can you speak to kind of what you're seeing in terms of data collection on that side, Karson?
Yeah, so I think like expenses that aren't super obvious to people, it's easy, let's take your rent. Every month you get the bill. So I have this expense. But I think there's a lot of expenses that people incur, but because they don't get a bill in the mail, it's less obvious to them. So an example in our business is the cost of turnover, right? And if you said similar to us, if we said to somebody, how much did you spend on turnover last year? They would say they don't know, but they could figure that, similar to you, that they could figure it out, right? They have it in a spreadsheet payroll report somewhere, but it's not a super obvious expense, right? You hire somebody, you train them, you onboard them, they go along their merry way, then they're starting to not work out, then they start messing things up, causing disruption to other parts of the business. All these things happen. And then you let them go and then you redo it. Like there's so many costs in there, but because you're not getting a bill when they walk out the door, it's not super obvious. And so that's just an example around if you really paid attention and doubled down on how much am I spending on hiring people, how many of them are working out, and how much am I spending when there's a terrible hire. I mean, anyone that's here that's a business owner that's had a bad hire knows the pain of it, but imagine if you put a price tag on that. And so helping our customers understand that has been an area where I think we can leverage data to actually make them see the expense. Sure. Yeah, please.
So are you able to determine how much we're spending on the actual training as well?
Yeah, so Vangst isn't right now in like the training business. Like we don't offer that, but a lot of companies, have their own training programs that they put their employees to. And so I'm sure they could figure out, we brought on this employee and we put them through ABC courses that we either paid for, or we paid time of another employee member to pay for. I think on the training front, a lot of it is honestly just other employees' time, right? If I hire somebody, then the HR manager spends all the time onboarding them, training them on how just even your own business works. Then they start working, right? I mean, that's another salaried employee's time spent on somebody that maybe ultimately doesn't work out, and then they got to do it again and again. It really adds up. And I think it's just when someone leaves, they don't, hand you $30,000 bill. I mean, there's a bunch of articles out there that a bad hire can cost you 3 times what you actually paid them, right? And so if you paid somebody $100,000 a year and they didn't work out, and when they walked out the door, someone handed you a $300,000 bill, that would probably catch your attention. But because it's not super obvious, I think people overlook it. And I think I'm hearing you guys say some similar things, that they have a lot of these expenses that are not super obvious, but you can help them realize and then hopefully reduce.
And labor by far is the highest operational expense in cannabis production.
Oh, hands down.
By an order of magnitude. Like if you look at cultivation, the next highest expense is like rent, electricity, and nutrients. And like all 3 of those are like similar depending on how much what your cultivation style is. But then labor is like by far, like it has multiple more zeros on the end of it than any one of those expenses.
Right.
Yeah, I think too, like, it's a great question because it's a struggle, I think, for everybody in this room, whether you're operating a ancillary business or a licensed operator. It's like, how do you measure labor productivity, effectiveness, training time? How do you measure those costs, and how do you measure performance? It's like really, really hard. And that's the thing I think that we all have in common. We can all contribute to that, to those, to the ability to do that. Trym is tracking task management, tracking like how much time the growers are taking to execute tasks. What we can do is also come at a layer, measure how effective they did that task. We can combine these data, share it with Vangst, and now we have metrics of who's performing the best. How do we upskill everybody to that same level? And we can create better incentives to create a healthy work environment. And so it's really circular, but it goes back to being able to track that stuff, right?
It's great. Now, it's interesting because I feel like I'm hearing a lot of different issues around data. On one hand, companies might not be collecting the right data to make those decisions, to understand what the costs are. Companies might be collecting it, but putting it in like pen and paper spreadsheets, and you can't really do that analysis very quickly or, connect it to other pieces of data that you have. What do you find is like the most often case? Is it that data is being collected, or that not the right data is being collected, or what would you kind of say? And I'll ask you first, Matt.
I'd say right now 90% of the cannabis industry is not using a system like Trym or Adaviv to collect data in any regard. And for those that are, some subset of that 90% are collecting data through some amount of sensors deployed and some amount of like manual measurements being read on a daily basis. The methodology for collecting that data could be as simple as like writing it on a whiteboard outside the door so the cultivation manager can walk around and look at it, or putting it in a spreadsheet with some attempt to map it, all the way up to highly sophisticated, agronomists that work on the team that are collecting data, doing data exports from their sensors, things like that. But I'd say the vast majority are still using pretty relatively manual data collection processes. Of the 10% that have leaned into tech, some of them have embraced it heavily. Like we have some grows that have invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in sensors, and they have every bench, every solenoid on their bench. Every time an irrigation event happens, they can see the measurements, they can see everything, inputs and outputs. So there are definitely some that have really leaned into it, but I would say on standard, the industry at large still is still more on like the laggard side of technology adoption.
I think as time goes by, obviously that will change. I think about my friends over at LeafLink when we started our businesses around the same time, and I remember we went to find out how dispensaries were ordering brands, and they had these people literally had them all written down on a whiteboard, right? Like, I'm going to order X amount of Wana, I'm going to order X amount of Keef Cola, right? There was no marketplace. And now like over 50% of the industry uses LeafLink's marketplace. And of course, like, that took time, but I think that's just an evolution, like similar with Trym, right? Like, LeafLink's now a cannabis household name, right? If you have a dispensary, you're likely ordering your products through LeafLink, because people realize, wow, this is really not effective for me to be writing this on my whiteboard and picking up the phone and calling this salesperson to bring this product over. Like, it's crazy that was how it was. And I'm sure it'll be the same with your business. So I feel like that's exciting that only 10% are using it now, and people will realize, and
yeah,
this is how it started in the industry, right?
Yeah, if it was the inverse of that, it would be a terrible business, and I should probably So there is a lot of opportunity. We have been on both the leading and the bleeding edge of helping with that adoption, I would say. And we, I think, have contributed in a meaningful way to getting some farms from very small all the way up to MSOs on our platform and showing them the success they could have. But yeah, we do have a lot of opportunity left, and I'm definitely very excited about seeing the increase. You know, when we first started, there were most of the people that most of the farms we visited when we first started Trym, even this was 5 years ago, it's like not a lifetime ago, didn't have any sensors, and if they did have sensors, they weren't connected to the internet. And so that was half a decade ago, and now I would say most have at least like some amount of rooms where they've added some sensing technology, and you know we're starting to see, like, when people come inbound, they know what we do now, and they're excited to talk to us about leveraging our service.
Yeah, I was listening to this. I like the Tim Ferriss podcast, and I was listening to an episode the other day. They said that it takes 8 years to build a brand that has like recognition, right? Because they were talking about people that just like, one of the questions people oftentimes ask is, you know, like, how do I build a brand, right? And they were just like talking about, you know, okay, start in one market. First off, product first, right? Like your product needs to be freaking phenomenal, right? And then start in one market and get that market going and get everyone talking about it and everyone using the product. They were more talking about consumer products, but like we've only been working on it for 5 years. Like you made a ton of progress, and like in just the world, it takes 8 years to build a recognizable brand. So I think that people that find an opportunity to like have build a business that they think they can really bring value to, like you got to stick with it for a long time. Like, it will take time for people to find out about Trym and any business that we start. But I think it's exciting that people are adopting it, and you're not even to that 8 year mark yet.
I wonder if that number was more publicized, how many founders would start?
Well, yeah, that's it. People talking about like starting these businesses, and they want to know why, 12 months in, they're not on like their yacht yet. It's like, I'm wondering that too, but here I am at the CannaData conference, right? Like trying to make it, right? So like, I think it takes a long time to build a successful brand, and you got to stick with it.
Yeah.
100%.
Absolutely. And with new technology too, I feel like there's that Henry Ford quote, like back in the days of horses, if you ask someone, what do you need? Like it'd be a faster horse, not a car. Like you don't even know
what you need
out there and what you need and how much better it can be. So like kind of relates to that question. If I am a cultivator out there and I realize overnight, oh, actually data is really important, I should be collecting this. And they contact like one of you guys, there has to be some sort of like readiness check or health check for this to like be successful. You can't just put sensors in the ground and not really change anything around your operations for you to get the full impact of what that would be. So if someone wants to be better at collecting data, what are some things that they can start doing, whether that's organizationally or just in terms of how they structure their growth to prepare for something like that? Because that is a big shift.
Sure. Jump on it. Yeah, I mean, well, one of the first things that we try to do when we engage with an operator cultivator is, take a temperature, ask to share some data, look at their yields, and just do an assessment, right? And then show them how we can help. Like we have an ROI calculator, for example. And we uncover some areas of waste. And what we do is we frame it in variability, like how much variation you have cycle to cycle in your yields, quality, in labor hours, all that stuff that's involved in cultivation. And then look for, where is that waste coming from? Every variation comes from some source of waste. It could be pest or disease outbreak. It could be this kind of pen and paper and effective communication, spending too much time on reporting. Wherever the case, we try to do this assessment and just prove like, hey, we can help you in this area. There's lots of low-hanging fruit. Let's start with one of those. We can automate your scouting process so that your team is more targeted, so that you don't need all your crew to be scouting every day. We can just show them where the issues are. They can be much more targeted. For example, how much are you spending on beneficials? These are treatments. That's often it's a lot. and asking why are you spending that much? Well, we're scared of an outbreak. Well, what happens if you use less? Oh, we don't know. We're too scared to try. So, using our sensors, our tech, our AI to help not replace anybody, but just identify the low-hanging fruit and prove that we can help. And then often the opportunities will open up like exponentially from there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I almost feel like the whole point is not just to cut costs. You're not trying to like cut, because there are some areas where I'm sure like you're not protecting yourself from pests where you should be spending more. So it's almost like figuring out what is the right amount to be protecting myself enough, but also just maximizing my yield and growing.
Yeah, I mean, everything is an optimization problem, really, and that's what we try to do.
Yeah,
is help them optimize, and often it's kind of freeing especially for managers, and because a lot of these guys, as Matt can probably attest to, spend their time putting out fire drills every day, running around, and they want to be focusing on science, the crop science and the genetics. And so I think that's where technology, computer vision, smart software, smart sensing can come in and make their jobs easier.
yeah. I want to ask you, Matt, actually, like I'm sure there's also a behavior change that needs to take place when you do make a commitment to install like software like this or put sensors in the ground. You kind of have to take a step back and review your operations. So what have you seen with some of your most successful clients? Like what changes do they have to make like using data as a part of how they evaluate their business, just a normal part of their day-to-day?
Yeah, I think with any software system, sometimes customers' eyes are bigger than the plate. They buy the service thinking like this grows the weed for me, right? And then they realize they actually have to like use it every day and put the inputs into it, and you get out of it what you're going to put in, just like anything. And it does take a behavior change. We've seen failures with customers launching where a manager bought it, expecting their team to use it, but the team resisted. We've seen it the other way around where the team buys it and the managers fully adopt it. So there's no like requirements to leverage it. And like, it really does have to be a whole, like the service that we offer covers your compliance management. It covers precision agriculture. So like crop observations. It also covers task management. So like to get the most out of it, you really do have to implement it across the board and be thorough about it. The companies that have been most successful about it have really embraced the change and said, we are now, we have digitally transformed our business. We don't write in this spreadsheet anymore. We put it into Trym. We do that because these are the outputs that we get. And they've seen meaningful changes. Like there's one of the largest greenhouses in California. We increased yields by 40%. And, Karson said at one point, it's not that we're competing against optimization versus hiring. Like nobody lost their job. They just grew 40% more wheat, and that's a great thing.
And as they're growing, your business grows and inevitably you need more people. So now you can just, you don't need to hire more, but you don't need to, they probably had to hire more people if their business grew by 40%.
Yeah.
Like honestly.
So, another great example is we work with one of the largest MSOs in the country. We're in 14 facilities with them now, and we're like literally written into the SOPs. So it says, to do this action, you do it, you do this. And then the next step is you go to Trym and you record this. And, they have like a little link to our support article. So I'd say the companies.
Sticky, like that's how you start getting.
Totally.
Right? Like, no, it's going to be a lot harder to like churn you out if they're very much relying on you and you're written into their SOPs.
Totally. Sure. That's the same thing I told
Great move. Yeah.
I said that's the same thing I told Delta.
I need to get into their SOPs for our next round. For the Series C, SOP, get into an MSO's SOP. We're noting that down.
I actually want to talk about also the kind of the labor aspect of that too, because I feel like with the plant's so mysterious, like water stuff happens. Yeah, like I think that is kind of more to uncover. But to me, labor is very like, you need this many people to do this, So for me, I'm a little surprised that more people aren't using labor management, especially for something that's as large a scale as like running an entire like production facility. So like Karson, why do you think there's such a disconnect? Like why aren't more people using a service to literally understand how to wisely like spend like money on labor?
It's super interesting. Again, I do think it's a little bit of that an over expense that people don't understand how much it's actually costing them. So that's one. I think another one thing that I've found, particularly with working with MSOs, is that it's very disjointed each state. And so, we've tried to say, okay, we're coming to headquarters, we're going to have this grand plan where we're going to understand all your labor needs in all of your markets. So we go and it's this whole thing. And then like randomly we get a call from the manager in Kentucky, which we didn't even know they were operating in. And they say, we need 60 workers tomorrow, right? And that wasn't part of the plan at all. And so I think that the industry is like changing so quickly, and like high level strategy is changing so quickly. And that's not necessarily trickling down to the people on the ground in the States. Like it's every single year, like when we go and we meet with our largest customers and they talk to us about what their hiring plans are going to be. It actually, when we look back at the end of the year, it never ends up being anywhere close to anything that they planned for. So I don't know if that's like the immaturity of the industry. I don't know if that's like people are changing their plans so often, but it feels as though like labor, which is their number one expense, I'm always kind of fascinated that the plans change so much. And we're trying to work with our customers to help them realize how much it's costing them and make really good plans and try to stick to them. But I think, again, it's going to be a timing thing. And I think that all these businesses are very new and the plan's changing and the industry's changing. And yeah, it's always been interesting. It would make our job a lot easier if we knew in January, you're going to have this many hires in this location, but it hasn't really been the case.
I think it's tough too when you have situations where you're growing like 40% more or even 40% less.
Yeah.
Like you kind of do have to make those on the fly changes. Do you find that that's just the nature of cannabis?
So I'll give you an example, like Michigan as an example. In the beginning of this year, there was a huge demand for the product and not enough supply. And so people really, really needed staff. Like Michigan was our biggest market this year. And now obviously there's a massive surplus of product and wholesale prices are plummeting in Michigan and they don't need as many staff. But I think like things like that, happen, and like you have all this demand and you don't have the supply, you need product, you need to get people in and hire for them. So I think that I would say that my gut says it's just the immaturity of the industry, and that when we're sitting here at the 10th annual CannaData conference, people will have been able to figure out how to better organize and better plan around their labor. But I think it's immature and states are immature and companies are immature.
Yeah, when you're selling at $3,000 a pound, it's really easy to hide a bunch of inefficiencies. When it's costing you like 400 input costs back to maybe, even upwards of 1,000, you're still making great margins. But then all of a sudden you see prices drop below 1,000 for like high quality indoor. And that happens over a 24-month time period. Like you got to figure out really quickly how to get more efficient. So like, I think the ones that figure out how to put together a labor plan and production plan that is actually going to be realistic and attainable are going to be the ones that are going to be able to succeed. And I don't see how you get to a realistic forecast without the level of data that we're talking about here, Yeah. Oh yeah.
So for value for you, where the market is varying. Especially my law firm, they're taking businesses offline, we're reducing tier count, we're doing a lot of this stuff, this is scale. I'm just wondering, is there a line in your ROI out there?
There's never a bottom in any market. I mean, it's just what in reality, like if you look at, I used to work in solar, right? And when I first started in solar, it was $5 a watt. When I left solar, it was 50 cents a watt. And that was over a 10-year time period. So I think that I think the lowest cost of production that for bids, let's say, and to be able to make any margins, probably like around like $400. That's probably like the lowest I think realistically you can get to in cannabis. But like when we first started Trym, it was $3,000 for indoor, and now, like you're saying, you're lucky to get $1,000 in a lot of markets for high quality indoor. And I'm talking about highest. Like we work with a producer in Oregon right now that sells for around $1,000 a pound, and they're like one of the top 3 producers in the market in the state. So for high quality indoor, so it's really rough,
Real talk.
Yeah.
Really rough.
So I think we're on with your plans. There is, you have to continue to pursue a lower cost of income. To it, right? Even your example, solar is perfect. Or this will continue to get more competitive. Thereupon, today, asking for the second largest, is right? We said. So, we're going to to use money on this basis. Shape trend. It and all your costs. So that it doubles the cost, right? More than. I think where your platforms have a great opportunity is how we further leverage more of your data to continue to optimize cost for Colorado. We've hit bottom, we're all out now, right? Finally, it's been easy, it's nice to help, but this will happen again, 20 plus, right? Guaranteed based on this will happen. So how we work together to further optimize that cost and find that true bottom. Because no, I mean, now again, 5 or 10 years from now, we may be at $150 a pound for right back cost.
Yeah.
Right.
And the economies of scale and the tech can theoretically get us there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but yeah, I totally agree with you that the market leaders do in many states set the price, and but then you end up in these people that have struggling assets. Like if it's the difference between selling at a loss and not selling at a loss and making payroll, or holding your line and not making payroll, like it's a pretty easy decision. Yeah.
Based on that, you know.
Let's do it. Okay.
Yeah. No.
But I guess that, Ian, if you were to look at the data that you guys are seeing in the market today, right? So this is your pitch to me of like, hey, this is oftentimes, but there is no simple don't know, right? So you're looking at a sustained greatest percent of that use consistently across most operations. Right, grams of handle. Greenhouse is 40%, right? That's huge. And I think like if we're out there doing something very, very bad, that they can figure it out. But do you feel like there's a sort of consistency you're seeing across most cultivators that you work with, and what is that?
Yeah, so to your point, I'll for the first time recap the question for those on Zoom. The question was like, there's no silver bullet in any one particular thing to optimize, but what have we seen to be the most repeatable opportunity for improvement? And I would say it's different for every company, but we've seen some pretty major improvements just in removing manual data collection and moving it to a process. Like one of the places that we've worked with was on the compliance side, growers were literally cutting the tags off, reading out the weight of the plant that they were weighing, yelling out the last 4 digits of the tag. Somebody's writing it down on a piece of paper, then they hand it to somebody else with a stack of tags that then types all that into metric.
Great for my business. So many people needed.
Yeah.
So like just what we have a solution that it helps with harvesting, and it makes it to where all of that process turns into one thing. So the minute you're done harvesting, the harvest is done. And so there's like, that is one of our best selling features, just the efficiency improvements on harvesting. On the precision ag side, I'd say the one major improvement that we see is most people aren't they don't actually understand what's going on in the substrate. They might know what their temperature and their humidity is, but they don't actually know like what the water content and EC is of their particular substrate. And by measuring that, you can get really pinpoint on your irrigation strategy. And although it's not your number one operational expense, nutrients and water have a huge impact on your overall expenses. So really optimizing irrigation strategy is probably like the closest we have on silver bullet for the precision ag side. And I think streamlining the manual processes that, regulation is to operate as a licensed business, you have to comply with the regulations. To comply with the regulations and without thinking about what is the best way to comply with this can lead to some really superfluous costs, and layering in software that's built to reduce those costs, like what we've built for cultivation specifically at Trym, can really help there.
Yeah, I mean, very, very similar. I would, again, go back to calling this an ag product, right? Which means it's a crop, which means a plant, which means it's very complex. So it's very hard sometimes to distill, where exactly ROI is coming or where the biggest one is, because by doing a few things well, you can make improvements across the board essentially. But I think Matt said a good summary. Like what we see in strong ROI is basically increasing people productivity and saving labor costs. Again, it's not always a factor of hiring and firing. It's just making people more effective. So, all of the farms we've worked with, we've seen at least 20 up to 30-40% improvement in labor productivity. And it's through similar things, first foremost, automating scouting, which is just basically like, what are the most tedious tasks that people shouldn't be wasting their time on? And I think that's where we help the most, is automating that through scouting, but also using that data to make people more effective at their positions. And the automated reporting is a huge one, replacing all that pen and paper. Cultivation, plant health, stuff they're doing in the field, scouting, and then helping them, often the managers and the growers we work with, they're spending hours, 3, 4, 5+ hours a week, generating these reports to then send to their higher ups that don't have the time to read a 2-page report. So, and we can generate that report in a matter of a few minutes, right? If we have the right data. I think the big untapped bucket is that we're looking at strongly now is like plant health treatments. Those are really expensive as well, beneficial bugs, sprays, and there's really limited data on how to optimize that. And so we see a lot of growers spending a lot of money, and we think we can cut that by half at least, just by helping them optimize the right amount of treatment levels.
I think about the costs and not huge draw. I can't, but yields. Far.
Yeah, and by doing all these things, ultimately the side effect is having consistent higher yields. And like Matt, yeah, we've seen improvements 30, 40, 200% as well.
Trying to stat Trumpy.
Sorry.
That was actually the sound grower. No.
I have a question. So I know that there's some very exciting new markets opening up. When you have no data to work off of, whether that's like with workforce planning or with just like you just want to plan your cultivation to just be able to like use technology and data when you haven't like done this ever before. Like how do you go about that, or like what do you see? And I'll start with Karson, just for how do you plan your workforce around an operation that has never existed before?
Right. Well, in our last panel, we were talking a lot about content and tools that you can give to your customers. And so we actually have a piece of content of like, I think we call it like grow in a box or something, which is basically like, these are the positions that you will need to hire for if you win a license. Because a lot of times, and it's happening less and less, but back in the day, like people used to call us up and say, I'm applying for a license and I literally have no idea anything about the cannabis industry or anything about the hires that we would need to have. They straight up don't know. So we did create a guide that just shows like, based on how many square feet the facility is, this is, and by the way, we didn't just like make this up, we surveyed our customers, and so they could probably be more efficient, but this was, based on if they worked with you, but this is based on the data that we have, how many hires you would need to have, what kind of hires you would need. And then of course we had the salary guide as well as like all the descriptions of what these folks do. So we do have like those kind of tools and resources that we can give to our customers. And we're always working on updating them as we see like what's successful and what's not. I think it'll be really interesting this year with all of the layoffs as we see businesses with less people, like what is that actual amount of people that you actually need? So we're actually talking about like at the end of this year, once it feels like a lot of the excess is wiped out, redoing the report to show like the lean way to run, and maybe, we could work you guys into it. But yeah, we provide those tools, whether or not people use them or not. So I don't know.
Yeah.
They seem to be always overstaffed
I'd say also like,
until now, till whatever. I don't know if we're I don't know what we're in, but till now, they've been overstaffed.
I think like one of the things I've seen is if somebody's opening, let's say like back when Oklahoma was a new market.
Right.
Somebody's opening a grow in Oklahoma, they go to the conference in Oklahoma. Somebody's opening a grow in New Jersey, they go to the local conference in New Jersey. You need to go to the markets that have already like gotten the ever living crap beat on them and learn there. So like go to an out-of-state market that's very mature and talk to the grower that's like I've gone to conferences where people have their like one pager that they're selling the business on their trade show booths. They're like, oh yeah, by the way, like, you know, it's like there are plenty of lessons to be learned. And like when we started Trym, the best advice I got was from other founders. And so it's like, this is how you need to run your investor pipeline. This is how you need to think about hiring. Like those lessons are invaluable. And now I'm happy to share any of those lessons that I have with any other founders, right? Growers, although, you know, there's kind of the legacy history of growers' secret sauce is what makes them, you know, thrive. I think the regulated market has opened up a lot of that like willingness to share experiences. And I think that's probably like go to Colorado, talk to Matt from Pioneer. You know, if you're opening a grow in New Jersey, it's a brand new market. You know, here are the lessons that these guys have learned in these mature markets where they have seen year over year the cost per pound get cut in half. You know, because then that's going to give you like if you're building a new grow right now and you think you're going to grow and this is the price that you have one number put in for your operational plan, like that number is going to be wrong, and you need to like have a sensitivity model that assumes that number is a fraction of what you think it actually is going to be.
Absolutely. And I think it's hard too, because like what's unique about cannabis is that it's not an industry where, you know, it's legal across the US everywhere and the industry is growing in the US like altogether. Like there are certain states that are way ahead of the game, and just find the state where the regulations are the closest to the ones in your state currently and just learn those lessons. Like there are people you can literally ask who are very like have made those mistakes and can help you with the planning. But I think I'm getting my notice that we're out of time. So thank you guys. Really great panel and appreciate